They were two black twins, calm, elegant, successful CEOs sitting quietly in their paid VIP seats, ready to board a flight that would change everything. Then came the moment no one expected. A flight attendant leaned in and said softly, "Excuse me, would you mind switching your seats? A white passenger needs them." Imagine that. You've worked your whole life to earn respect, comfort, dignity, and in 1 second, someone tells you you're less deserving of all of it. What would you do? Would you stay silent to avoid trouble? Or would you speak up, knowing your voice might cost someone their job, maybe even your peace? It's not just a story about two sisters on a plane. It's a story about every person who has ever been told, "You don't belong here." It's about the power of choice, the calm before courage, and the strength it takes to stand with grace instead of anger. Because sometimes, the hardest fight isn't to win an argument. It's to keep your dignity when the world tries to take it away. So, if you've ever faced a moment where silence seemed easier than truth, this story is for you. Stay with me. Let's go back to that flight, to that moment, and see how one decision changed not just a team, but an entire nation. And before we begin, if this story moves something in you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people hear stories that remind us humanity still matters. The hum of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was a constant, low symphony rolling suitcases, muted announcements, and the distant hiss of espresso machines. Inside the Skylux VIP lounge, the sound softened into something almost elegant. Jazz brushed the air. Crystal glasses clinked. Conversations floated between investment portfolios and weekend homes on Lake Oconee. It was a world cushioned from the noise outside until one voice cut through it. "They should sit in the back," a woman whispered, though her words were anything but quiet. "Give those seats to someone who paid for them properly." The words landed with a sharp echo, rippling across the lounge like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned subtly, pretending not to listen, but listening all the same. Two young black women, identical twins, looked up from their table near the panoramic windows. They didn't flinch. Amara Brooks and her sister Lila had learned, long ago, that reacting too quickly gave people like this woman exactly what they wanted: attention and control. Amara's fingers stayed wrapped around her coffee cup. Lila's eyes flicked up, meeting the woman's reflection in the glass. Calm. Controlled. The woman stood a few feet away, her blonde hair in a perfect salon curl, her pearl earrings catching the overhead light like a statement of rank. The twins said nothing, but the silence that followed was heavier than any response. Lila leaned closer to her sister and murmured, "You heard that?" "Right," Amara nodded, her voice soft, loud, and clear. For a few moments, the world seemed to go back to normal. The twins returned to their laptops, working on last-minute notes for the Global Business Innovation Summit in London. Their fintech startup, PulsePay, had been chosen as one of the keynote companies to represent minority-led innovation in the U.S. It was the kind of opportunity that could redefine their careers. They had paid for their first-class tickets months ago, using company miles they'd earned with 14-hour days and years of grinding through doubt. They had earned every inch of that lounge seat, but the woman didn't stop. She turned to a young gate agent nearby, her voice rising just enough for others to hear. "I'm Linda Kavanaugh," she said, pronouncing the name like it came with an automatic discount. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. My husband and I always sit together in first class. There must be some mistake." The agent, nervous, barely 30, looked from his tablet to the twins and back to Linda. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, the flight is fully booked," he said carefully. Seats 1A and 1B are confirmed for Miss Amara Brooks and Miss Lila Brooks. Linda's lips tightened. Well, they can move, can't they? A murmur moved through the lounge. Amara's gaze lifted slowly. Her voice, when it came, was calm and measured. I'm sorry, but we won't be moving. We booked those seats months ago. Linda gave a smile that wasn't really a smile. I'm sure the airline can offer you some compensation. Maybe a travel voucher. $500. Lila set down her tablet, her tone deceptively polite. $500 for our seats, or to make you comfortable, for the first time. A flicker of discomfort crossed Linda's face. She wasn't used to being questioned, least of all by women half her age who carried themselves like CEOs. Amara reached over, placing a steadying hand on her sister's wrist. It's not worth it, she whispered. But in her chest, she felt the familiar burn of quiet anger, the kind that doesn't shout, but simmers. The young gate agent shifted awkwardly. The entire lounge had gone silent again. The quiet wasn't peaceful now, it was judgmental. Waiting. Lila exhaled, leaning back. Some people still think the price of a seat comes with the right to decide who deserves it, she said under her breath. Amara gave a small, tired smile. Let's just focus on London. Outside. A plane lifted off into the gray morning sky, its engines fading into the distance. Inside, the tension lingered unspoken but alive. Across the room, Linda Kavanaugh adjusted her designer scarf and muttered something to the gate agent, who nodded nervously and disappeared toward the service desk. Amara knew this wasn't over. She'd seen this kind of entitlement before, the way people dressed it up in manners and smiles, but couldn't hide the rot underneath. And somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered, "Here we go again." Lila caught her sister's expression. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." Amara didn't look up. "That she's not done yet." Lila smirked. "Good. Neither are we." For a few long minutes, the two sisters sat quietly, letting the storm gather in its own time. The lounge had gone back to its muted rhythm, but the air felt different now, charged, expectant. No one knew that within the next half hour. A single phone call would shake this polished room to its core. But for now, all that existed was the calm. Before the reckoning, the soft hum of jazz, the scent of roasted coffee, and two women sitting quietly in the front of the room, waiting for dignity to prove itself louder than privilege. The morning light in Atlanta always had a way of finding its way through glass. Inside the Skylux lounge, it painted the marble floor in soft gold and silver. Amara watched the sunlight stretch across her shoes, then fade into the carpet. There was something calming about that simple rhythm, the way light moved and changed without asking anyone's permission. Lila, across from her, had her laptop open. The screen reflected the numbers from their latest investor pitch. Her fingers tapped quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we close this partnership in London, PulsePay gets a foothold in Europe. That means access to small business microloans across 30 countries. Amara smiled. "You sound like our own commercial." "It's the truth, though," Lila replied. "People think we just built another app. But this is community finance. It's a chance for folks who never had a voice in the system to finally be seen." "That's why we started it," Amara said quietly. "So people don't have to beg for what they've earned." Their company, PulsePay, had begun in a small shared office 3 years ago. 2 laptops, 1 whiteboard, and an old coffee pot that never really worked. What they lacked in investors, they made up for in faith. They'd built everything from the ground up, turning rejection letters into stepping stones. Lila used to joke that their biggest advantage wasn't capital, but stubbornness. Amara knew that was true. The two of them had grown up watching their mother, Evelyn Brooks, fight her way through corporate ceilings that were never meant to break. Now Evelyn was the CEO of Skylux Airlines, the same airline whose lounge they were sitting in that morning. But hardly anyone in the room knew that. They never flaunted it. They didn't need to. Success felt better when it was silent. Lila stretched her arms, taking a sip of her cold brew. You think Mom would be proud if she saw us now? Amara looked at her sister with a faint smile. She already is, but she'd still remind you to double-check the numbers. That's Mom, Lila said, laughing. Their laughter was soft, almost private. A few people glanced over but didn't linger. The twins had that kind of presence, quiet confidence, the kind that drew attention without asking for it. But underneath the calm, Amara could feel tension still rippling from the earlier confrontation. The woman Linda hadn't disappeared. She was still somewhere in the room, talking to staff, gesturing sharply. Lila noticed it too. You think she's making a complaint? Probably, Amara said. But we've done nothing wrong. Still, Lila's tone carried an edge. People like her always find a way to make trouble sound official. Amara sighed. Just breathe. We've dealt with worse. That was true. They had grown up in neighborhoods where people underestimated them before they even spoke. College professors who called them lucky. Investors who suggested they hire a more experienced face for meetings, meaning someone white, older, male. Every time, they'd learned to respond with composure. They had learned that calm was a kind of weapon, but sometimes that calm was heavy. A lounge attendant approached them, then a young woman named Sarah, her badge slightly crooked, her smile polite but tense. Excuse me, Miss Brooks. Miss Brooks, could I speak with you for a moment? Of course, Amara said. Is there an issue? Sarah hesitated. Mrs. Kavanaugh has requested a seat adjustment for her flight to London. She believes there was a mistake with her seating arrangement. There wasn't, Lila replied before Amara could. We confirmed our booking weeks ago. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Sarah's tone was apologetic. It's just that Mrs. Kavanaugh is insisting. She's very persistent. My manager asked if you might consider exchanging seats voluntarily. Amara leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, voluntarily. Lila shook her head. We're not giving up our seats. Respectfully, that's not happening. I understand, Sarah repeated softly. I really do. I'll let my manager know. As Sarah turned to leave, Lila called out gently. Hey, it's not your fault. You're just caught in the middle. Sarah smiled, relieved, and nodded. Thank you. When she left, Amara stared out the window again. Outside, a Boeing 787 rolled down the tarmac, gliding like a silver bird. She thought of how many people it took to make something that heavy fly. Mechanics, engineers, flight attendants, pilots. All pieces of a system that only worked when every part respected the others. Lila watched her sister's face. You're thinking about Mom again, aren't you? Maybe, Amar said. She used to tell us that every system is built by people, and people can choose to build better ones. Lila laughed softly, or worse ones, depending on the day. Before Amara could reply, her phone buzzed a message from one of their team members in New York. Flight confirmation received. London meeting still set for 9 AD. Local. Good luck, boss. She smiled faintly at the word boss. It didn't always feel real. There were still days she felt like that 22-year-old trying to convince a bank to believe in her idea. But then she looked at Lila, strong, unapologetic, full of light, and she remembered why they were here. Because they belonged here. Minutes passed. Linda Kavanaugh's voice rose again at the counter, clipped and impatient. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I've spent over 200 nights flying with this airline. I'm not sitting apart from my husband because of a computer glitch." Tom, the gate agent, tried to soothe her. "Ma'am, there's no glitch. The manifest is correct. Seats 1A and 1B are occupied." By whom, she snapped. Tom hesitated, then glanced toward the twins. "Mrs. Kavanaugh. Those are the Brooks sisters." Linda followed his gaze. When her eyes met Amara's, something unreadable passed between them, a mix of irritation and disbelief. Then came the smile. It was the kind of smile that made people smaller. "Well, maybe they don't mind sitting closer to the bathroom. I'm sure they'll still be comfortable." The words carried like a slap. Every conversation in the lounge paused mid-sentence. Lila's shoulders tensed. Amara felt her chest tighten, but she stayed still. Calm. Always calm. Lila turned to her sister. "You hear that?" "Yes. And you're just gonna sit there." Amara's eyes stayed steady. "I'm deciding what's worth answering." Lila shook her head. "You and your calm. One day it's going to break." "Maybe," Amara said quietly. "But not today." Her calm wasn't silence. It was focus. A stillness that came from knowing her worth wasn't up for negotiation. Across the room, Linda continued her tirade, her voice sharp, self-assured. But the twins didn't move. They sat in the sunlight, surrounded by quiet grace, waiting for something bigger to unfold. A few minutes later, Tom returned, looking nervous. "Miss Brooks," he began carefully, "our manager will speak with you shortly. Mrs. Kavanaugh has escalated the issue." "Of course she has," Lila muttered. Amara looked up at him, her tone gentle. "Thank you. Tom, we'll wait right here." Her calm voice made him blink. He nodded, grateful, and hurried away. Lila leaned closer. "So what's the plan?" Amara took a slow breath. "We wait. Let the system show us what it's made of." And in that moment, neither of them knew that the system was about to expose itself completely. Linda Kavanaugh had spent most of her life in places where people opened doors for her before she even reached them. Country clubs, private lounges, boardrooms lined with polished mahogany. Respect wasn't something she earned. It was something she expected. That morning, as she stood at the Skylux counter, she felt the familiar burn of frustration. The young gate agent was polite, careful, but useless. She hated when people spoke softly to her, as if she were the problem. Her voice, crisp and rehearsed, carried through the lounge. "I've flown over 2 million miles with this airline. 2 million. You can check the system." Tom nodded nervously, scrolling through his tablet. "Yes, ma'am. I see that. You've been a loyal member for 17 years. Then fix it," she said sharply. "My husband and I always sit together." "Always." Tom hesitated, glancing toward the twins again. "Mrs. Kavanaugh. The Brooks sisters?" "The Brooks sisters," Linda repeated, as if the name itself offended her. "Who are they?" Tom swallowed. "They're registered passengers in seats 1A and 1B. Linda turned her gaze toward Amara and Lila. They were sitting quietly by the window, sunlight tracing halos on their faces, typing on laptops like nothing around them mattered. She couldn't decide what bothered her more, their calm or their confidence. To Linda, calm was privilege, confidence was inheritance, and she didn't like seeing it reflected in faces that didn't match hers. Her husband Robert approached from behind, his tone low. "Linda, maybe we should just let it go." She waved him off. "No, This isn't about the seats. It's about principle. We've earned the right to sit together. He sighed. It's always about principle. When you're embarrassed. Linda shot him a glare that could freeze stone. Robert held up his hands. Okay, I'll grab us another drink. As he walked away, Linda's phone buzzed. A notification from her social feed. Someone had posted a photo of her at the fundraiser last night, her diamond bracelet glinting under ballroom light, captioned Atlanta's Power Couple of the Year. She smiled faintly. That was the version of herself she wanted to be seen. Now, standing here arguing over airplane seats with two young women. She felt small, and she hated that feeling. Sarah, the lounge attendant, approached hesitantly. Mrs. Kavanaugh, I assure you we're doing everything possible. Unfortunately, first class is full. Linda's smile returned, thin and sharp. Then make room. Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. Linda leaned in, lowering her voice but keeping it firm. Do you understand who my husband is? Sarah's eyes darted toward the Brooks sisters, then back to Linda. Yes, ma'am, but nothing. Linda cut her off. This lounge used to know how to treat its platinum members. Her voice was rising again. People nearby looked up from their phones. The quiet hum of conversation dimmed to a hush. Amara glanced toward the commotion, then back to Lila. She's escalating, she said softly. Leela's eyes narrowed. She's building an audience. Amara nodded. That's exactly what she's doing. Tom's voice came through again, shaky but determined. Mrs. Kavanaugh, please lower your voice. Linda turned on him. Don't tell me to lower my voice, young man. I'm not the one causing a scene. He looked at her, confused. But you are, ma'am. For a brief second, silence fell like a curtain. Linda's jaw tightened. You know what she said coldly. I want to speak to your manager. Right now. Sarah motioned toward the back office. I'll call her. Please give me a moment. As Sarah hurried away, Linda fixed her gaze on Amar and Lila again. She walked toward them, her heels striking the marble with precision. She stopped a few feet from their table, folding her arms. Excuse me, ladies. I'm sure you understand. This is just a mix-up. My husband and I always sit in those seats. Lila looked up, eyes steady. There's no mix-up. Ma'am, those are our seats. Linda's smile faltered. I see. Well, the airline is trying to make it right. Amara's voice was calm. There's nothing to make right. The tickets are valid. Linda tilted her head. I'm sure the airline can offer you something generous for the inconvenience. We're not inconvenienced, Amara said. You seem to be. Lila hid a smile behind her cup. The tension was thick enough to cut. Linda's fingers tapped against her handbag, her nails like tiny metronomes of irritation. People around them pretended to read, but eyes flicked up from magazines, curious and entertained. Linda leaned forward slightly, her tone lowering into something colder. I'm just saying, dear, sometimes people end up in places that weren't really meant for them. The sentence hung there, heavy and unmistakable. Amara blinked once. Her face didn't change, but her voice lost all warmth. You mean like this lounge? Linda's eyes widened for a second before she laughed softly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Amara said. Lila stood then, slow and deliberate. The room seemed to shrink around her. Her voice carried just enough for others to hear. You might want to sit down. Ma'am, the air up here can get a little thin for people who aren't used to earning it. A few quiet gasps rippled across the lounge. Linda's face flushed. She opened her mouth, but no words came. before she could recover. Sarah returned with a woman in a gray blazer, the lounge manager. "Mrs. Kavanaugh," the manager began carefully, "I've reviewed the manifest. The Brooks sisters are confirmed in seats 1A and 1B. Unfortunately, there's no way to alter the seating without violating our policies." Linda blinked, incredulous. "Policies? You're quoting me. Policies." "Yes, ma'am," the manager said. "We treat all passengers equally." Linda gave a short, humorless laugh. "Equally? That's adorable." Amara rose slowly. Her tone was even, measured. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, we're just here to fly to London. Nothing more." Linda turned toward her, eyes sharp. "Then you should remember that." Lila took a step forward, but Amara gently placed a hand on her arm. "Not here," her eyes said. The manager intervened, her voice polite but firm. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, I'm going to have to ask you to please step aside." Linda looked around, realizing every set of eyes in the lounge was on her. The confidence drained from her smile. She adjusted her scarf, gathering what was left of her composure. "Fine," she said stiffly, "but this isn't over." Amara's voice was soft. "It never is." Linda walked back toward her husband, the air around her thick with embarrassment. Robert looked up from his drink, reading her face. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. At the far end of the room, Lila sat down again, shaking her head. "Some people just can't help themselves." Amara looked thoughtful. Maybe. Or maybe they've just never been told no. Outside, a plane took off into the clear blue morning. Inside, the twins went back to their screens, the soft sound of typing returning like a heartbeat. But something had shifted. The air felt charged, as if the lounge itself was holding its breath. Neither of them knew that in less than 20 minutes, one phone call would turn this quiet moment into a lesson the entire airline would never forget. The tension in the Skylux lounge hung like humidity in the air, thick, invisible, but impossible to ignore. Even after Linda Kavanaugh had retreated to her corner, the ripples of what had just happened still moved through the room. People pretended to read, to scroll, to sip their coffee, but every ear remained open. Amara Brooks could feel their glances, those quiet, curious stares that never asked directly but always implied. Her sister, Lila, tried to shake it off, drumming her fingers against her laptop. Her patience had limits, and that line had already been crossed. She looked at Amara. "Do you ever get tired of being calm?" Amara smiled faintly. "Every day." "Then why keep doing it?" "Because someone has to stay in control. If we lose that, we let them win." Lila sighed. "I know, but sometimes I wish winning didn't mean swallowing every insult." Before Amara could answer, Tom, the young gate agent, returned with a clipboard in his trembling hands. His expression said it all. He didn't want to be there. "Miss Brooks," he began quietly, "the manager asked me to extend another offer on behalf of the airline. We'd like to provide each of you a $500 voucher if you'd be willing to switch to business class for this flight. We'll also add bonus miles to your account." Amara stared at him for a moment, then said softly, "Tom, we booked these seats months ago. We're not moving." "I understand," he said quickly, his voice shrinking. "It's just Mrs. Kavanaugh insists. She's saying she's not feeling well, that she has flight anxiety and needs to sit near her husband." Layla leaned forward. "And that somehow becomes our problem." Tom's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I know it sounds unfair. I'm following orders." Amara exhaled slowly. "Whose orders?" Tom hesitated. The regional customer service supervisor? Lila laughed under her breath. Wow, she really pulled strings fast. Amara's tone remained measured. Tom, do you think this is fair? Tom looked away. No, ma'am, but I also don't want to lose my job. That honesty softened Amara's eyes. I understand. You're in a tough spot. But please remember, doing the wrong thing just to keep your job isn't the same as doing your job right. He nodded, embarrassed, and stepped back. I'll let the manager know. When he left, Lila leaned closer. You think this is over? Noamer said. This kind of thing never ends with one offer. Across the room, Linda watched them with quiet irritation. She sipped her champagne, whispering to her husband, who looked more like he wished he could vanish into the carpet. Robert's hand rubbed the bridge of his nose. She ignored him. A few minutes later, the manager herself approached. Her name badge read Claudia Shaw, and her posture carried the kind of authority that came from dealing with too many difficult customers in too many years of service. Good morning, ladies, she said, with a polite smile. I'm Claudia, the lounge manager. First, let me sincerely apologize for the disruption earlier. That's not the experience we aim to provide here. Amara nodded. We appreciate that. Claudia continued. I know this is uncomfortable, but I need to ask one last time. Would you consider moving to business class, Mrs. Kavanaugh has requested it as a medical accommodation. A medical accommodation, Lila repeated, incredulous. Since when is entitlement a medical condition? Claudia's lips twitched, almost forming a smile before professionalism returned. I understand how it looks, but she's a long-time customer, and her voice faltered. This request is coming from corporate. I don't have much choice. You always have a choice, Amara said softly. It's just that some choices have consequences. Claudia hesitated. Her eyes flicked between the sisters, and for a moment, something human passed through her gaze. Guilt, maybe? Then she lowered her voice. Off the record. I think you're right. But please, let me handle it my way. Amara studied her face, then nodded. Do what you think is fair. Claudia exhaled, relieved, and walked away. When she reached Linda's table, her tone hardened. Mrs. Kavanaugh, we've spoken with the passengers. They will not be moving. Linda's eyebrows lifted. Excuse me? Their seats are confirmed, Claudia continued firmly, and our policy is clear. We cannot displace ticketed passengers for any reason other than safety. Linda's voice turned icy. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline. I expect better than this. Claudia's composure didn't waver. And we appreciate your loyalty, ma'am. But loyalty doesn't override policy. Linda leaned forward, her tone venomous. Let me guess, this is about appearances, isn't it? You need your diversity photo for the company brochure. 2 young faces at the front of the plane make a great story. The word struck like a spark in dry air. Conversation stopped. Forks froze midair. Everyone heard her. Claudia's face went pale. Mrs. Kavanaugh, please stop. But Linda wasn't done. I know how this works. You have quotas to meet. You think I don't see it. It's not about fairness. It's about optics. Lila stood. That's enough. Linda turned, her eyes full of mock innocence. Excuse me. You heard me, Lila said quietly. That's enough. Amara rose too, placing a hand on her sister's arm. Lila, let it go. No. Lila's voice shook, but not with fear. You don't get to talk to people like that and hide behind your platinum status. Linda's smirk faltered. Oh, sweetie, you don't know who you're talking to. Amara's voice cut through the air soft, but firm enough to silence the room. Neither do you. The quiet was absolute. Even the music in the lounge seemed to fade. Claudia looked between them, her face a storm of confusion and panic. Mrs. Kavanaugh, please sit down before this gets worse. Linda's voice rose again, dripping with self-righteousness. Worse, I'm the one being discriminated against. You're all so desperate to look progressive that you're punishing loyal customers. You know what? I'm going to file a complaint. Right now. She pulled out her phone, her hand shaking not from fear, but fury. She didn't notice Robert standing behind her, his expression one of quiet mortification. He whispered, Linda, stop. You've said enough. No, she snapped. They'll remember my name. Across the room. Amara exhaled slowly, her patience finally thinning to its edge. She took out her own phone, her movements calm, deliberate. Lila watched, knowing that when her sister moved like this, something decisive was coming. Amara dialed a number and placed the phone on the table, on speaker. The tone rang once, twice. Then a deep voice answered. Amar, everything okay? You're supposed to be boarding soon. The room fell into absolute silence. Yes, everything's fine, Amray said evenly. We just have a situation here in the Skylux Lounge. Someone is asking us to give up our first-class seats. Who, the voice asked, now sharper. A Mrs. Linda Kavanaugh. Amara replied. She believes we don't belong in seats 1A and 1B. A pause. Then came the voice again. Calm, but heavy. I see. And where exactly are you calling from the Skylux VIP Lounge in Atlanta? The voice turned to steel. Put me on speaker, and please hand the phone to whoever's in charge. Amara's eyes met Claudia's. The manager's face drained of color. She stepped forward hesitantly. Who am I speaking with? This is Raymond Brooks, said the voice, Chief Executive Officer of Skylux Airlines, and father of the two women standing in front of you. A gasp moved through the lounge. Every conversation, every breath seemed to vanish. Claudia froze. Mrs. Kavanaugh looked like she'd just been doused in ice water. Raymond's voice filled the room. I want to know why my daughters were asked to surrender seats they paid for. And I want to know why a member of my staff allowed this conversation to go this far. No one spoke. The silence was the kind that made hearts pound. And for the first time that morning, Linda Kavanaugh had nothing to say. For a full 10 seconds, no one in the Skylux Lounge moved. The sound of the CEO's voice on speaker hung in the air like static before a thunderstorm. Amara stood calm, her phone resting on the table. Lila's hands were clasped together, not from fear, but from the effort of holding everything inside. Claudia, the lounge manager, looked as if her entire career was flashing before her eyes. On the other end of the call, Raymond Brooks spoke again. I'm waiting. Ms. Shaw, why are my daughters being harassed in one of our premium lounges? Claudia's voice trembled. Mr. Brooks, sir, I didn't realize you didn't need to realize who they were, he interrupted. You just needed to realize what was right. Across the room. Linda Kavanaugh's face drained of color. She lowered her phone, her bravado collapsing into silence. For the first time, she looked small. Raymond's tone softened slightly. Amara, are you both okay? We're fine, Dad. Amara replied quietly. Just tired. He sighed. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Not again. Amara smiled faintly. It's nothing new. Raymond's voice hardened again. It shouldn't be normal. Everyone could hear every word. The power dynamic of the room had flipped completely. People who had been whispering now sat frozen, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Raymond continued, "Claudia, please hand the phone to the passenger causing this issue." Claudia hesitated, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, the CEO would like to speak with you." Linda looked as though she might faint. "Me," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am," Claudia said quietly. Linda took the phone with trembling fingers. Her voice came out in fragments. "Mr. Brooks, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just concerned about my seat." "A misunderstanding," Raymond said slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "That's what we call it when people dress prejudice up as preference." Linda blinked. "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," he interrupted. "You told my daughters they didn't belong in those seats. You told them that what they'd earned wasn't theirs to keep. That's not a misunderstanding, Mrs. Kavanaugh. That's discrimination." The lounge was so quiet. Even the espresso machine in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Linda's voice broke slightly. "I didn't know they were your daughters." Raymond's reply was calm but cutting. "And that makes it better." She stammered. I thought—" "That's the problem, Mrs. Kavanaugh. You thought, you assumed, you decided who deserved what before you even asked who they were." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." "You're not sorry," he said softly. "You're shocked. There's a difference." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Raymond's voice turned professional. "Ms. Shaw, please remove Mrs. Kavanaugh from the lounge. Her access privileges are to be revoked immediately. Effective today." Claudia's mouth opened slightly. "Yes, sir," Raymond continued. "And Ms. Shaw, after that, I want you to meet with HR this afternoon. You'll help write new training modules about bias and equity in customer service. You understand?" "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Thank you for the opportunity to make it right." He paused. "That's all I need. My daughters have a flight to catch." Amara's tone softened. "We'll see you in London." "Dad?" Raymond's voice warmed. "I'll be there waiting. And Amara, yes. You handled it better than I would have." A faint smile touched her lips. "I learned from you." The call ended. The silence that followed was the kind that leaves an imprint. Linda Kavanaugh stood frozen, her mascara beginning to smudge, her hands trembling. She looked around, searching for sympathy, but found only lowered eyes and distant stares. Her husband Robert finally rose, his expression weary and sad. "Come on, Linda," he said quietly. "Let's go." She hesitated, as if pride still fought to stay alive. But the battle was already lost. She followed him out, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound faded, step by step, until the door closed behind them. In the stillness that followed, Lila exhaled sharply. That was intense. Amara nodded, her calm voice returning. Justice always sounds intense when it's quiet. Claudia approached them carefully, her face pale but composed. "Ladies, I don't even know where to begin." "You don't have to," Amara said kindly. "Just do better next time." Claudia nodded, her eyes glossy. "You have my word." Lila smiled faintly. "For what it's worth, you kept your composure better than most." Claudia managed a nervous laugh. "I think I aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The tension broke slightly, replaced by a collective exhale from the few passengers who had watched everything unfold. Someone in the back even began to clap quietly before realizing the awkwardness of it. Amara shook her head, amused but exhausted. "Let's just board." As they walked toward the gate, Lila nudged her sister. You know this is going to go viral, right? Probably, Amara said. But that's not what matters. Lila raised an eyebrow. Then what does that people see what accountability looks like when power's used the right way? Her words hung in the air like sunlight through glass. They reached the gate, where Tom stood waiting, visibly shaken, but smiling nervously. Miss Brooks, he said, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. You did your job, Amara replied. Now just remember what the right job really is. He nodded quickly. I will. Lila smiled at him. You'll be fine. Tom, just keep your spine next time. He laughed softly, embarrassed but grateful. The sisters boarded first. As they stepped into the quiet of the first-class cabin, the hum of the aircraft felt different now. Not just mechanical symbolic. The sound of movement forward. They took their seats. 1A and 1B. Lila leaned back, closing her eyes. That was one for the books. Amara smiled. One for the headlines. More like, you think Dad's going to keep this quiet? She chuckled. You know him. There'll be a memo by noon. The plane began to taxi. Through the window, Atlanta stretched out beneath the rising sun, a city of contradictions, of progress and memory. Amara thought about what her father had said. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Maybe not. But they did. And in handling it, they had forced an entire system to look at itself. Halfway through the climb, the seatbelt sign flicked off. A flight attendant approached, smiling. Ladies, the captain wanted to personally welcome you aboard. He said your father called ahead. Lila grinned. Of course he did. The attendant leaned closer. Also, Mr. Brooks instructed us to make sure you had a peaceful flight. Whatever you need, just let me know. Thank you, Ari said sincerely. As the attendant walked away, Lila nudged her sister. You realize we just witnessed karma in real time. Maybe not karma, Amari said softly. Maybe just balance finding its way back. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, clouds rolled like soft hills beneath them. Finally, Lila spoke again. You ever think about how many people get treated like that every day and never get to make that call? Amar nodded slowly. Every single day. So what do we do with that? Amara looked out the window. We build something better. That answer lingered between them as the plane sliced through the morning light. Somewhere behind them, a woman named Linda was facing consequences she never expected. And somewhere ahead, two sisters were heading toward a future they'd earned seat by seat, choice by choice. By the time the plane touched down in London, the world had already changed. Somewhere over the Atlantic, someone in the lounge had filmed everything Linda's voice, the argument, Raymond Brooks's voice echoing from the phone. The video, shaky but clear, had found its way online. By the time the twins cleared customs, it had over 3 million views. Lila saw it first. Her phone lit up with a flood of notifications, messages, mentions, articles, and interview requests. She frowned and turned the screen toward her sister. Amara looked at the video thumbnail, her own calm face staring back at her. Phone on the table. Linda standing red-faced in front of her. The title read, Black CEO twins refuse to give up seats. Then their father calls the CEO himself. Lila grinned. Well, that escalated quickly. Amara sighed. I told you someone was recording. You also told me to stay calm. Lila teased. Looks like calm went viral. They both laughed. A quiet, tired kind of laugh. The terminal was crowded, full of travelers from everywhere, but people still glanced at them, whispering, smiling, nodding in quiet recognition. It was surreal. By the time they reached their car, their phones were ringing nonstop. Reporters, bloggers, activists, even corporate leaders sending support messages. Amara turned off her phone. "I'm not talking to anyone until after the conference." Lila chuckled. "You think the press is going to wait for that? I think they'll have to," Amara said softly. "I'm not ready to make this about us." In the quiet of the car, London's gray skies blurred past the window. Lila leaned her head against the seat. "You think Dad's seen the video?" Amara smirked. "He's probably already in damage control mode." She wasn't wrong. Across the ocean, in Skylux's headquarters in Atlanta, the storm had reached its peak. The video had hit every major news outlet. Hashtags were trending. The company's public statement was being drafted. Raymond Brooks sat in his office, hands clasped, reading comment after comment. Some were angry, some supportive, all demanding accountability. He wasn't worried about his reputation. He was thinking about his daughters. How many times had they faced moments like this without a phone call to back them up? His assistant, Jordan, appeared in the doorway. "Sir, the board is waiting for you in conference room A." Raymond nodded and stood. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the air was thick with tension. Screens displayed news segments looping the same footage. The board members spoke over one another. "This is a PR nightmare." One said. "It's a blessing in disguise," said another. Raymond raised a hand, silencing them. "Let's focus on what matters." A woman from marketing spoke up. "The incident raises serious concerns about our service culture. People are asking if bias training exists for our staff." "It exists," Raymond replied. "Clearly, it's not working." He leaned forward. "We can't fix what we won't face. And I'm not interested in spin. I want substance." Another executive spoke cautiously. "What about Mrs. Kavanaugh? She's threatening legal action for defamation." Raymond's tone didn't change. "Let her. The truth is her own worst witness." The room went silent. He continued. "We'll issue a public apology not because we're at fault, but because our system allowed this to happen. Every employee involved will be retrained, starting with leadership. I want equity training, not as a formality, but as a culture shift." Someone from HR nodded. "We'll begin drafting the new protocol immediately." "Good," Raymond said. "And while we're at it, suspend our VIP priority policy. It's supposed to reward loyalty, not arrogance." The board looked stunned. "You want to cancel the entire program?" "I want to rebuild it from the ground up," he replied. "No more status over service. No more privilege without respect." No one argued. They knew better. Back in London, Amara and Lila finally reached their hotel. Exhaustion hit the moment they walked through the door. Lila collapsed onto the bed. "You realize we just started a global conversation." "Right." Amara smiled weakly. "We didn't start it. We just gave it a face." She sat by the window, looking down at the busy streets below. People rushing, talking, living their ordinary lives. She thought about all the moments in her own life when she'd been told to wait, to move, to be polite. She had always been calm, but calm had a cost. Lila sat up. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Dad wasn't the CEO?" Amara turned slowly. Every day. That truth sat heavy between them, because they both knew that without his call, things might have gone differently. The world didn't always listen to reason, but it always listened to power. Lila's voice softened. "You think this will change anything?" "It has to," Amara said. "Or what's the point of all this?" She looked at her sister, eyes full of quiet conviction. "We're in a position to build something better. So we will." The next morning, they walked into the Global Business Innovation Summit. Cameras flashed as they entered. Journalists whispered their names. Amara straightened her blazer. Ready, Lila grinned. Always. Their panel was scheduled for noon. But by the time they stepped on stage, the room was packed beyond capacity. People weren't just there to hear about fintech anymore. They were there to see the women who had become a symbol of dignity and grace under pressure. Amara began to speak. Innovation isn't just about technology. It's about integrity. It's about building systems that don't just work for the privileged, but for everyone who's ever been overlooked. The room was silent, every word sinking deep. Lila followed. "We've spent years building PulsePay to help communities access resources they were told they didn't deserve. But what happened on that flight reminded us discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it's polite. Sometimes it smiles while it excludes you." The audience nodded, many with eyes glistening. Amara continued, "Change doesn't happen from outrage alone. It happens when people in power decide to be brave enough to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." When they finished, the applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. One journalist asked, "Do you feel vindicated?" Amara paused. "No, I feel responsible." The answer stunned the room into silence again. Later that night, back in their hotel, the twins sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, the streets below buzzing with life. Lila leaned on the railing. "You know what's crazy? What we were just trying to get to London, now we're the face of some global story." Amara smiled softly. Maybe that's how real change starts by accident. She sipped her tea, thoughtful. Mom used to say storms aren't meant to break us. They clear the air. Lila looked at her sister, her eyes warm. "Guess we survived the storm then." Amara's voice was gentle. "No, we turned it into sunlight." And for the first time in days, they both laughed freely, the kind of laugh that sounded like healing. By Monday morning, the Skylux headquarters in Atlanta no longer felt like the same building. Every hallway hummed with whispers. Screens flickered with news updates. The video had reached 20 million views and counting. The story wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It had become a cultural flashpoint. Major outlets called it the flight that grounded privilege. Editorials debated everything from race and class to corporate ethics. Late-night talk shows replayed the audio clip of Raymond Brooks saying, "You just needed to realize what was right." Inside the boardroom, tension was thick enough to touch. Executives who once strutted with quiet confidence now spoke in cautious tones. No one wanted to be quoted. No one wanted to be blamed. Raymond entered the room, his expression unreadable. Everyone stood a little straighter. He didn't speak for several seconds. He just looked around the table, letting silence settle. Finally, he said, "I assume everyone here has seen the video." A few nodded nervously. "Good." He continued, "Then you already know we have two problems. The first is how this happened. The second is what we do next." The head of public relations, a woman named Denise Walker, cleared her throat. "Sir, we've issued a preliminary statement expressing regret and confirming that an internal review is underway." Raymond turned toward her. "Regret isn't accountability. Denise, people don't want our sympathy. They want our sincerity." She nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." He walked to the large glass window overlooking the city. His reflection stared back the face of a man who'd spent 30 years building something he believed in. now realizing it wasn't as unshakable as he thought. Another executive spoke cautiously. "There's talk online of boycotts, sir. Some customers think we only care because your daughters were involved." Raymond turned, his voice steady. "They're right to think that. This incident hit me personally. But it's not just about family. It's about every passenger who's ever been told their worth depends on someone else's comfort." The room fell silent again. He continued, "I don't want a campaign. I want change. From policy to practice. From hiring to hospitality. From the ground crew to the boardroom." Denise took notes rapidly. "Sir, that kind of reform will take time." Raymond nodded. "Then let's start today." Across the table, the HR director adjusted his glasses. "We've identified the employees directly involved in the incident, the gate agent, the manager, and the customer service rep." Raymond stopped him. "They're not the only ones. If the system made them feel like they had to choose between doing what's right and keeping their jobs, then the fault is ours too." He looked around the room again. "The days of hiding behind policy are over. From now on, leadership leads by example. Every one of you will undergo the same equity and bias training as our frontline staff." One of the senior VPs frowned. "With respect, The optics of that could be—" Raymond cut him off sharply. "Optics are what got us here." The VP lowered his eyes. Raymond's tone softened slightly. "We're not here to protect reputations. We're here to rebuild trust." Outside the conference room, reporters were already camped at the building entrance. Cameras flashed every time someone in a Skylux badge walked by. The company had become the epicenter of a national conversation. Later that afternoon, Raymond met privately with Claudia Shaw, the lounge manager. She sat across from him, her posture rigid, her voice small. "Mr. Brooks, I can't apologize enough." He studied her for a moment. "Tell me what you've learned." She took a breath. "That being polite isn't the same as being fair. That silence helps the wrong people feel comfortable." He nodded. "And what will you do with that lesson?" Her eyes met his. "I'll make sure no one on my team ever has to hesitate the way I did." "That's all I needed to hear," he said. "You'll stay on as part of our new training division." Her eyes widened. "You're not firing me." He smiled faintly. "You're taking responsibility. That's rare. Let's use it." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste it." As Claudia left, Raymond's assistant, Jordan, entered the office. "Sir, Mrs. Kavanaugh's legal team has reached out." Raymond didn't look up from his papers. "Let me guess she wants her membership reinstated." Jordan nodded. "And she's threatening to sue for defamation, claiming emotional distress." Raymond sighed. "She experienced distress because she was held accountable. That's not a lawsuit. That's a life lesson." Jordan couldn't help but smile. "Should I tell legal to proceed with termination of her account?" Raymond nodded. "And make sure it's public. Quiet punishments don't change cultures." The following day, Skylux released a new statement. It wasn't polished or performative. It was raw and direct. It read, "Skylux. Airlines is committed to dignity and equality in every interaction. We failed to uphold those values last week, and for that, we apologize. Accountability will not stop at words. Effective immediately. We are launching the Dignity First Initiative, a company-wide reform that redefines what elite service means. True excellence begins with respect. Within hours." The statement went viral again, but this time, for the right reasons. People praised its honesty. Activists shared it as an example of corporate humility. Meanwhile, in London, Amara and Lila watched it unfold on their hotel television. Lila grinned. "Look at Dad. He's turning chaos into a movement." Amara smiled softly. "He's doing what leaders are supposed to do, protecting others, even when it hurts." Their phones buzzed again. Invitations poured in talk shows, podcasts, business conferences. They were being called the Brooks Twins of Change. Lila laughed at the phrase. "Sounds like a superhero duo." Amara chuckled. "I'd rather just be seen as people doing the right thing." "You think this will last?" Lila asked. "If we keep the conversation going, it will," Amara replied. Later that week, Raymond joined them in London. When he entered their suite, the air filled with warmth and relief. For a moment, the CEO disappeared, and only a father remained. He hugged them both tightly. "I watched that panel you did," he said. "You two were brilliant." Layla smiled. "Guess the calm approach works after all." Raymond laughed. "Your calm cost me a few heart attacks, but yes, it worked." Amara looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Dad, the world's treating this like a fairy tale ending, but this isn't the end." He nodded. "It's just the beginning." They sat together that evening, overlooking the London skyline. The city lights shimmered like constellations in motion. Raymond leaned back. "You know, when I built this airline, I thought success meant luxury, numbers, expansion. But now I realize success means humanity." Lila raised her glass. "To humanity." Then Amara smiled. "And to accountability." They clinked glasses. The moment was quiet, but it carried the weight of something larger than themselves. A family standing at the intersection of power and purpose, having turned a moment of prejudice into a lesson in grace. The next morning, news outlets across the world ran headlines about the new Skylux initiative. Other airlines followed suit. A few even reached out to collaborate. One anchor closed her segment with the line, "When leadership listens, society moves." In Atlanta, Claudia began drafting the new training program, her notes full of determination. In London, the Brooks sisters prepared to return home, ready to keep building. The world had witnessed the storm. Now, it was watching the rebuilding. And somewhere, deep inside the heart of Skylux, a quiet transformation had begun, not in its planes or profits, but in its people. 1 week after the incident, the world had not stopped talking about the Brooks twins or the airline that changed overnight. What began as a 30-second clip filmed on a shaky phone had become something far bigger, a conversation stretching across continents. Television anchors debated it. Podcasts dissected it. Families discussed it at dinner tables. And somewhere in that noise, people started looking at their own workplaces, their own biases, their own quiet choices. In a small cafe in Chicago, a young barista named Erin watched the video between customers. She had never flown first class in her life, but she felt something deep when she heard Amara say, "You just needed to realize what was right." That night, she sent an email to her company suggesting sensitivity training for customer service staff. Her manager replied the next morning, "Let's make it happen." In a law office in Houston, a senior partner shared the clip during a meeting about diversity recruitment. He said, "If an airline can admit its blind spots, so can we. Everywhere." Something was shifting, small, invisible, but real. Back in Atlanta, Skylux headquarters buzzed with a different energy. The old fear had faded, replaced by purpose. New posters lined the hallways. Service begins with respect. Employees greeted passengers with genuine warmth rather than rehearsed politeness. Claudia Shaw stood in a training room filled with 30 new recruits. She looked nervous at first, but quickly found her voice. "When I started here," she told them, "I thought good service meant keeping customers happy at any cost. I was wrong. Good service means doing what's right, even when it's hard." The recruits listened closely. Some even took notes. When the session ended, Claudia lingered at her desk, staring at a framed photo of the Skylux lounge before its redesign. The memory of that morning still lived behind her eyes. But now it felt like a turning point, not a failure. She whispered to herself, "We're not fixing a company. We're rebuilding a conscience." At that same moment, across the ocean in London, Amar and Lila were finishing the final day of the Global Business Innovation Summit. Their panel had drawn record attendance. Investors lined up afterward to speak with them about PulsePay's expansion. But it wasn't the business talk that stuck with people. It was Amara's closing line. She said, "Innovation isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who listens first." The audience had gone silent before erupting into applause. Later that evening, the twins walked along the Thames, coats pulled tight against the chill. City lights shimmered on the water like a trail of gold. Lila kicked a pebble into the river. "You think all this hype will fade?" "It will," Amara said. "But the idea won't. Ideas don't fade. They echo." Lila smiled softly. "The ripple effect." "Huh, exactly," Amara said. "The ripple always outlives the splash." Their phones vibrated almost in sync, a notification from their father. "Dad, proud of you both. Press wants a joint interview next week." You and Lila grinned. Of course he can't resist the spotlight now. Amara laughed. He earned it. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb outside Atlanta, Raymond Brooks sat in his living room, still in his work suit, television muted. The house was silent except for the ticking of a clock. He wasn't thinking about the company or the headlines. He was thinking about the responsibility that came with power. His wife, Evelyn, walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Long day?" she asked. He nodded. "The longest in 30 years. She smiled, sitting beside him. "But look at what came from it. You raised 2 strong women. You taught them to speak softly but stand tall." He looked down at the mug. "Maybe they taught me instead." Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. "That's how it works. Ray, the next generation finishes what we started." The next morning, Skylux unveiled its new ad campaign. It wasn't flashy, just a black screen with white text that read, "First class isn't a seat. It's a standard below it." The company logo appeared, followed by a quiet message. "Every passenger deserves dignity." The ad ran on every major network. Within hours, it trended worldwide. Amar and Lila watched it from their hotel room. Neither spoke at first. Then Lila whispered, "That's powerful." Amara nodded. He understood the assignment. Social media flooded with news stories, airport staff posting about their retraining, passengers sharing moments when employees stood up for them, strangers writing essays about how decency shouldn't be revolutionary. For the first time, it wasn't outrage that went viral. It was empathy. A week later, the twins returned home. Atlanta greeted them like hometown heroes. At the airport, staff members from different departments stopped to thank them. Some asked for photos. Others simply said, "You made us proud." As they exited the terminal, Amara noticed something new above the Skylux sign, home of the Dignity First initiative. Lila smiled. "Looks like Dad wasn't kidding about change." Outside, cameras waited, but the sisters didn't rush. They took a moment to breathe in the warm southern air. Reporters called out questions. "Do you forgive Mrs.? Kavanaugh. Amara paused before answering. I don't hold hate for her. I just hope she learns. Another asked. What's next for you two? Lila grinned. More work. Less drama. The crowd laughed, and for once, the laughter felt light. Later that night, the three of them, Amara, Lila, and Raymond, sat together on the patio of their family home. Fireflies flickered between the trees. The sound of cicadas filled the warm air. Raymond leaned back in his chair. You know, when that call happened, I was furious. I wanted to storm down there myself. But watching you handle it with calm that changed me, Amara smiled. Sometimes stillness is the loudest form of strength. Lila lifted her glass. To stillness, then. Raymond chuckled. To courage. They clinked glasses, a few miles away, in a modest apartment. Tom Reed, the young gate agent, watched the same news story replay on his TV. He had been rehired under the new Skylux reform program. His eyes watered a little as he watched Amara and Lila's interview. He whispered to himself, Next time, I'll speak up first. In a downtown office. Claudia finished another training session, ending with a slide that read, Courage is contagious. She turned off the projector and smiled. The ripple was real. Weeks passed. The world moved on to other stories, as it always did, but something had changed quietly in the background. Passengers began treating staff with more patience. Employees felt freer to stand their ground respectfully. Even Linda Kavanaugh, now living far from Atlanta, had begun volunteering at a community center. A reporter tracked her down months later and asked why. She said softly, Because sometimes losing everything shows you what really matters. When the article went live, the comments surprised everyone, not with hate, but with forgiveness. Back at Skylux, Raymond walked through the terminal one evening. Travelers hurried past. Flight attendants laughed at the gate. Music played softly through the speakers. It all felt new again. He stopped at a large framed photo near the check-in counter. It showed Amara and Lila boarding the London flight, sunlight streaming over them. At the bottom, a small plaque read, Dignity flies first. He smiled quietly, then turned to head home. Because that was the real ripple, not the fame, not the news cycle, but the quiet ways people changed when someone finally reminded them what decency looked like. The studio lights were bright, almost too bright. Cameras glided silently across polished floors as a hush settled over the set. Every screen in the control room flashed the same words in bold white letters. Exclusive, the Brooks family. A conversation on dignity, power, and change. It had been nearly a month since the incident that shook the skies and changed a company. The frenzy had calmed, but the story had not disappeared. People still quoted Amara's quiet strength, still replayed that fateful phone call. The world was ready to hear what came next, not a statement, not an apology, but the truth behind the calm. Inside the studio, Amara sat between her father and her sister. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, her posture poised but relaxed. Lila, on her left, tapped her foot lightly under the chair, energy simmering just below her bright smile. Raymond sat on her right, dignified, the weight of leadership softened by the warmth in his eyes. Across from them sat the host, Diane Keller, known for her thoughtful interviews and sharp empathy. She looked at the three of them for a long moment before saying, You know, in 30 years of journalism, I've covered thousands of stories, but this one, it struck something deep, because it wasn't just about race, or privilege, or travel. It was about how we treat each other when no one's watching. Amara nodded gently. That's what we hoped people would take from it, she said. It was never about revenge. It was about respect. Diane smiled softly. Amara, when that woman demanded your seats, what went through your mind? There was a pause. Amara's eyes flickered down for a moment before she answered. I wanted to get angry. Every part of me wanted to. But anger only adds noise. I wanted to be heard clearly. So I stayed calm, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew calm would make the truth louder, Lila added. And for me, it was the opposite. I felt fire in my chest. I was ready to stand up and shout. But then I looked at my sister, and she just breathed. That was enough to center me. Raymond looked between them with quiet pride. That calm, he said, was the loudest protest I've ever witnessed. Diane leaned forward. Mr. Brooks, when you answered that call, did you know what was happening? He chuckled softly. At first, no. I thought it was a small inconvenience. But then I heard the tone in my daughter's voice. That stillness, I've heard it before. It's the sound of someone holding back everything they could unleash. I knew then that something serious had happened. Diane tilted her head. And you didn't hesitate. Raymond's voice lowered. When someone disrespects your children, every father becomes a storm. But power doesn't mean raising your voice. It means knowing which word changes the wind. The studio was silent for a moment. Even the crew had paused, eyes fixed on the family. Diane cleared her throat softly, her tone warm. You turned that storm into reform. Raymond nodded. We had to, because it wasn't just about one woman's arrogance. It was about a culture that let her believe she was right. Amara looked toward her father. That's what made me proud. He didn't hide behind policy. He stood behind principle. Layla smiled. And he finally admitted we were right. The room erupted in soft laughter. The tension broke for a moment, replaced by something tender and human. Diane continued. Let's talk about the aftermath, the reforms, the new initiative. It's rare to see a company respond with genuine accountability. Raymond leaned forward. The Dignity First initiative isn't a marketing plan. It's a promise. We rebuilt training from the ground up. We changed hiring policies. And most importantly, we stopped treating wealth as worth, Amara added. It's not perfect yet, but perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. Diane nodded, clearly moved. Lila, you've been called the voice of fire. People say you represent the emotion behind this movement. How do you feel about that? Lila grinned. I think that's accurate. My sister is the ocean. I'm the flame. But both are needed. She calms the storm. I light the path. Diane smiled. That's beautiful. And poetic. Lila shrugged playfully. I learned from the best. The audience chuckled softly. But then Diane's tone shifted. Gentle, but serious. Have you heard from Mrs. Kavanaugh? Since the incident, Amara took a breath before answering. Yes. She sent a handwritten letter to our office 2 weeks ago. Diane raised her brows. Really, what did she say? She apologized, Amara said simply. Not just for what she said to us, but for what she stood for that day. She said she'd spent her life surrounded by people who never challenged her, and for the first time, she wanted to listen. Lila nodded. I didn't expect that, but I'm glad she did. Because that's what this is all about, changing minds, not winning battles. Raymond smiled faintly. Grace is stronger than punishment. The audience broke into soft applause. Diane leaned back in her chair. Do you forgive her? Amara's voice was steady. Forgiveness doesn't excuse the harm, but it ends the cycle. So yes, I do. The silence that followed was powerful. The kind of silence that fills every corner of a room with meaning. Diane's voice softened. You know, a lot of people watching this, they're not CEOs or executives. They're everyday folks. What would you say to someone who's been underestimated, dismissed, or judged unfairly? Amara looked directly into the camera. Don't let someone's blindness make you doubt your light. You don't have to shout to be seen. You just have to stand your ground with grace, Lila added. And remember, you can't control how others see you, but you can control how you carry yourself. That's real power. Diane nodded, visibly emotional. That's beautiful. Thank you. She turned to Raymond. And for those in power, people who lead companies, teams, or even families, what's the biggest lesson from this story? Raymond's tone was calm but firm. Leadership isn't about being followed. It's about being accountable. The higher you stand, the more people you owe humility to. Diane smiled, blinking away emotion. That might be the quote of the year. The interview continued with lighter moments, laughter, anecdotes, reflections. But as it drew to a close, Diane looked into the camera with a final thought. Maybe the most extraordinary thing about the Brooks family isn't their success or influence. It's that they reminded the world that dignity doesn't need status to be powerful. It only needs courage. The lights dimmed slightly. The credits rolled softly over slow piano music. The family stood together, arms around one another, their smiles quiet but full. Outside the studio, a crowd had gathered, holding signs that read, "Dignity first and respect is the new luxury." Reporters shouted questions, but Amara just waved kindly before getting into the car with her family. As the car pulled away, Lila looked out the window at the flashing lights and crowds. "You think people will remember this a year from now?" she asked. Amara smiled. "Maybe not the headlines, but they'll remember how it made them feel." Raymond nodded, and that's what lasts. The city skyline reflected in the glass as they drove away, a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices start the loudest revolutions. The morning after the interview, America woke up to something different. It wasn't outrage this time. It was reflection. Coffee shops, classrooms, and office lounges buzzed with the same conversation, not about who was right or wrong, but about how one family's grace had reminded everyone of something too often forgotten: decency. Clips from the interview flooded social media. Amara's words, "Don't let someone's blindness make you doubt your light," became the quote of the week. Schools posted it on bulletin boards. A church in Baltimore printed it across its Sunday newsletter. Even corporations began referencing it in internal memos about integrity. In Seattle, a teacher named Marcus played the interview for his 9th grade students. Afterward, he asked them, "What does dignity mean to you?" One girl raised her hand and said, "It means standing tall without stepping on anyone else." Marcus smiled. Exactly. In Dallas, a group of flight attendants started a small movement called Dignity, first in the air, sharing their own experiences, their own small victories in making passengers feel seen and safe. The movement caught on fast. Within a week, thousands of service workers joined in: baristas, nurses, retail clerks, even police officers. The ripple Amara had spoken about was becoming a wave. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the Brooks family tried to return to normal life, if normal even existed anymore. At PulsePay's office downtown, Amara walked into a room filled with her employees, who all stood and applauded as she entered. She waved modestly. All right, sit down," she said with a laugh. Lila smirked from her seat. "Boss lady's famous now." Amara rolled her eyes. "Fame fades, Values don't. Her tone was gentle but carried weight. She continued, "We have a responsibility now to make sure the message we carry is more than just words. We don't change the world with hashtags. We change it with habits." The room went quiet as she spoke, her calm voice filling the space with purpose. Outside, the city buzzed reporters camped near the building, hoping for a sound bite. But Amara didn't give interviews anymore. She wanted the story to belong to everyone now, not just her family. Across town, Raymond was in a board meeting with Skylux executives and new diversity advisors. Charts filled the wall screens, showing positive trends, record customer satisfaction, lower complaint rates, better employee retention. But that wasn't what made him smile. It was a letter sitting on the table in front of him. It was from a 10-year-old boy named Caleb, written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mr. Brooks, I saw your daughters on TV. I told my mom I want to be like them. She said I already am. Because I'm kind. Thank you for showing people that being kind is cool." Raymond read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Some victories didn't need to be measured in profit margins. Later that evening, he met Amara and Lila for dinner at their favorite restaurant, the same one they used to visit before everything changed. When they arrived, the hostess smiled. "Mr. Brooks, it's good to see you again. Your table's ready." As they sat down, a family at a nearby booth recognized them. The mother whispered something to her kids, who shyly waved. Lila waved back, grinning. Amara leaned over. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Lila nodded. "Strange, but kind of beautiful." Raymond looked at them both, his voice low. "You know, I spent my life trying to climb ladders. But lately I've been realizing the higher you go, the more important it is to lift others up with you." Amara smiled softly. "That's what real leadership is." They talked for hours, not about fame or business, but about life, their mother's garden, their childhood road trips, the future they still wanted to build. For the first time in months, it felt like peace. Meanwhile, in a modest neighborhood in Ohio, Linda Kavanaugh watched the same interview replay late at night. She sat alone, a cup of tea untouched on the table. Her reflection stared back from the dark TV screen when she heard Amara say, "Forgiveness doesn't excuse the harm, but it ends the cycle." Tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered, "Thank you." A week later, she showed up at a Skylux community event not as a guest, but as a volunteer. She wore a plain blue shirt, no jewelry, no designer bag. When people recognized her, she smiled humbly. A little girl asked her, "Are you the lady from the plane?" Linda nodded gently. "Yes, sweetheart, and I'm here to learn how to be better." That video went viral too, but this time, it wasn't scandal. It was redemption. Months passed. The movement didn't fade. It grew quieter, deeper, more personal. Universities started including the case in ethics courses. Companies modeled new inclusivity policies after Skylux's. People began sharing their own dignity-first moments, holding doors, standing up for strangers, choosing empathy over ego. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't loud, but it was real. One evening, standing on a rooftop terrace overlooking Atlanta's skyline, Amara spoke at a private gala celebrating the anniversary of the Dignity First initiative. Her voice carried through the warm air, soft but strong. "A year ago," she said, "a small act of prejudice could have ended in silence. But silence didn't win. Grace did. What happened on that flight wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a lesson that dignity isn't granted. It's practiced." Applause filled the space. Lila stood near the edge, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the glass towers below. Raymond stood beside her. "You think people will keep the momentum?" she asked. Raymond nodded. "They will, because now they've seen it can be done." Amara joined them, her eyes on the horizon. And as long as someone remembers even one person, the ripple keeps moving. Below them, the city glowed alive, restless, full of stories still unfolding. In the end, it wasn't the scandal that defined the Brooks family. It was the grace they carried through it. And somewhere, in homes, airports, schools, and boardrooms across America, their story still echoed, reminding people that power isn't measured by position, but by compassion. The echo had become a heartbeat, and it wasn't fading anytime soon. By the time spring rolled around, the world had changed more than anyone expected. The Dignity First initiative had moved beyond airlines, beyond boardrooms. It had become something else entirely, a mindset, a quiet revolution disguised as empathy. In schools, teachers began incorporating dignity sessions into their weekly lessons. In hospitals, nurses shared stories of how small acts of respect transformed their patient care. Police departments in several states requested Skylux's new bias training modules. Even government agencies started reaching out for advice. One morning, Amara sat in her office at PulsePay, sunlight spilling across her desk. She scrolled through her inbox letters from strangers, stories from across the country. One message stopped her. It was from a woman named Teresa in Kansas City. "Dear Amara, I'm a bus driver. 2 weeks ago, a passenger yelled at me for being late. I remembered your interview where you said calm can be louder than anger. So I took a breath, smiled, and told him I was sorry he had a hard day. He paused, looked ashamed, and said thank you when he got off. That never happens. Thank you for reminding me that kindness isn't weakness." Amara sat back, her throat tightening. She whispered to herself, This is the real change." She printed the email and pinned it on her wall next to Caleb's letter, a small collage of humanity that reminded her why all of this mattered. That same afternoon, Lila burst into the office, her energy as infectious as ever. "You've seen the news?" "Right?" she asked, waving her phone. Amara looked up, smiling. "Depends which news. The good kind, or the kind that gives me a headache." Lila laughed. "Good kind. Congress just announced the National Dignity Task Force, inspired by the Skylux reforms. They're literally naming your quote in the proposal." Amara blinked. "Wait, seriously? Dead serious?" Lila grinned. "You're officially in government paperwork. Sis." Amara chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, that's a first." Lila leaned on the desk, her expression softening. "You know, when all this started, I thought it was just about us proving a point. But it's become so much more than that." Amara nodded slowly. Because people were ready for something real, something they could believe in. A knock interrupted their moment. Raymond stepped in, carrying 3 cups of coffee and that familiar quiet strength. "You two making history again," he teased. Lila laughed. "Apparently, Congress is quoting your daughter now." Raymond smiled, setting the cups down. "Then I guess I raised the right women." They sat together, the air light but meaningful. For once, there was no crisis to solve, no headline to manage, just a family sitting in the calm after a long storm. Later that week, Skylux hosted a national leadership conference in Washington. DHE, CEOs, educators, community leaders all gathered to discuss the ripple effect that had begun with a single confrontation in an airport lounge. When Amara took the stage, the room fell silent. "Dignity," she began, "isn't a policy. It's a promise we make to each other every day that we'll see the human before the title, the person before the privilege. Her voice carried softly through the grand hall. It started with a seat, a simple seat. But it was never really about where we sit. It's about what we stand for. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But Amara barely noticed. She wasn't performing. She was speaking from a place deeper than pride, a place of truth. After the session, an elderly man approached her backstage. He wore a faded veteran's pin and moved slowly, but his eyes were bright. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to thank you. I fought in wars where respect was a matter of survival. But I never thought I'd live to see people fighting for it in peace." Amara smiled gently, taking his hand. "Thank you for fighting both kinds of battles." That night, as she returned to her hotel, the city lights blurred through the car window. She thought of all the people who had reached out, the teachers, the workers, the leaders, the way one story had somehow connected them all. In her hotel room, she sat by the window, phone in hand. A notification popped up, a message from her mother. "Evelyn, proud of you, sweetheart. You turned pain into purpose. That's the rarest kind of victory." Amara smiled, her eyes misting. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. Across the hall, Lila and Raymond sat in the hotel bar, laughing over old stories. Raymond's laugh was deep, genuine, something his staff rarely heard. "You know," he said between sips, "I spent years running an airline, but I never realized the real flight was about lifting people, not planes." Layla raised her glass. "You finally sound like a philosopher. Dad?" He grinned, or maybe just a man who finally listened. The next morning, news outlets announced that Skylux had been nominated for a National Leadership Award in Ethical Innovation. It wasn't about profits or prestige. It was about impact. In Atlanta, Claudia Shaw, the former lounge manager, stood on the tarmac watching a new Skylux banner being raised. It read, "Every journey deserves respect." She smiled proudly, remembering the morning everything had gone wrong and how it had somehow set everything right. She whispered to herself, "We did it." Months later, back at the Brooks family home, they gathered for a quiet dinner, no cameras, no speeches, just laughter and warmth. Evelyn served her famous peach cobbler as the sun dipped below the horizon. Lila took a bite and groaned. "This is still the best part of any movement." Everyone laughed. Amara looked around the table, her parents, her sister, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She realized that the story wasn't about them anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been made to feel small and chose, instead, to stand tall with grace. As the evening breeze drifted through the open window, Raymond raised his glass to the lesson that started in a lounge. He said, Lila raised hers and ended in hearts. Amara smiled softly and continues everywhere dignity lives. They clinked glasses. The sound was soft, but full like a promise sealed not by fame, but by faith in something better. Outside, the first fireflies of summer blinked in the twilight. The world was still imperfect, still noisy, still learning. But maybe that was the point, because every small act of kindness, every quiet stand for what's right, was another spark in the long, slow light of change. And for the Brooks family, that light had become their legacy. A full year had passed since the day two sisters refused to move from their seats. 12 months, 365 days. But it felt like a lifetime. What started as a moment of injustice had turned into a movement, a quiet revolution built not on noise, but on grace. And now, everywhere you went, you could still feel its presence. In airports, posters with the Skylux emblem read "Dignity First." In schools, children wrote essays about standing up for what's right. In coffee shops, people spoke softly to staff, remembering the story that began with a whisper in a lounge. The Brooks name had become something more than a family name. It was a symbol not of perfection, but of persistence. That morning, Amara Brooks stood on the balcony of her Atlanta apartment, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The city below was alive, the hum of traffic, the rhythm of a new day. She breathed deeply, eyes closed, letting the sound settle in. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A notification popped up. 1-year anniversary. Skylux Dignity, first gala. Tonight. She smiled softly. Another chapter. Another moment to be grateful. A few hours later, she met Lila at the Skylux headquarters. The lobby looked different now, modern, bright, filled with photographs of real employees and passengers who had shared their stories. Above the reception desk, in bold letters, were the words, "Respect is the real luxury." Lila walked beside her, stylish as always, but grounded. "You ready for tonight?" Amara chuckled. "You make it sound like a wedding. In a way, it is," Lila said with a grin. "A marriage between purpose and progress." They both laughed. As they walked through the hall, employees stopped to greet them. Some shook their hands. Others just smiled and said, "Thank you." When they reached the conference room, Raymond Brooks was already there. Suit crisp, eyes thoughtful. He stood by the window, watching a plane taxi down the runway in the distance. "You two made it," he said without turning. Lila leaned against the doorframe. "You sound surprised." Raymond smiled. "Not surprised, just proud." He turned toward them. "You know, when all this began, I thought it was about saving a company. But I've realized it was about saving something much bigger, our humanity." Amara nodded quietly. "And it's still being saved every day." He looked at her, eyes soft. "You've carried this movement with more grace than I ever could." Amara smiled. "You gave it wings. Dad, we just made sure it kept flying." Later that evening, the Skylux Gala began. The ballroom shimmered with soft light and warm laughter. Leaders, educators, and activists filled the room, all gathered not to celebrate a brand, but a belief. On one side of the stage stood a large screen showing a video montage. Clips of ordinary people, a teacher in Denver, a nurse in Detroit, a farmer in Georgia, each sharing how the Dignity First message had touched their lives. One woman said, "I used to think kindness made me weak. Now I know it's my strength." Another man said, "That story changed how I raise my sons." As the video ended, applause filled the hall. Then came the sound of Amara's name being announced. She walked to the stage, her simple black dress reflecting the light, her presence commanding but calm. When she reached the microphone, the applause softened into silence. "I never imagined," she began, "that one moment of discomfort could become a catalyst for so much change. But maybe that's how the world grows, one uncomfortable moment at a time." She paused, her voice steady. "When that woman asked us to move, I remember thinking, this isn't about a seat. It's about a system. And we didn't stand our ground because we wanted to be seen. We stood our ground because we wanted to be respected." The audience leaned in. "Respect," she continued, "isn't something you demand. It's something you earn every day, through how you treat others, how you listen, how you learn." Her eyes softened as she glanced at her father and sister. And the greatest thing I've learned this year is that dignity doesn't begin in the spotlight. It begins in silence, in the small choices, the quiet patience, the moment you choose kindness when no one's watching. The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Lila joined her on stage, hugging her tightly. When the applause quieted, Lila took the mic, grinning. She always says things so gracefully. I just want to say, let's keep making good trouble, but with love. The room erupted in laughter and cheers. After the speeches, Raymond took the stage for the closing remarks. His voice was deeper, slower, seasoned by experience. When this began, he said, I was a CEO who thought success meant luxury. But my daughters taught me that true luxury is humanity. Tonight isn't about one family, one company, or one event. It's about remembering that we all sit on the same flight called life, and the only upgrade that matters is how we treat each other. The room went quiet. Some wiped tears, others just nodded, holding on to the truth of his words. When the event ended, the Brooks family stepped outside onto the terrace. The night air was cool, the city glowing below them. Lila looked up at the stars. You think people will keep this going? Amara nodded. They already are. We started a ripple. Now it's become a current. Raymond smiled. And someday, it'll be a tide. They stood together, side by side, watching the skyline. For a moment, no one spoke. It was enough just to be there together, whole, peaceful. The next morning, headlines across America read, Dignity First 1 year later. The Brooks family movement still inspires millions. In homes and classrooms, the message lived on. Teachers shared it. Leaders echoed it. Parents passed it down. Somewhere in Kansas City, Teresa the bus driver taped a quote on her dashboard. Grace is not weakness, it's wisdom. In Atlanta, Claudia Shaw began mentoring young women entering leadership. And in Ohio, little Caleb, now 11, told his class he wanted to be a pilot. So everyone gets treated like they matter. The Brooks family story had stopped being theirs long ago. It belonged to everyone now, to the people who carried it forward quietly in their own lives. Years later, when people talked about the event, few remembered the exact details. They just remembered how it made them feel seen, valued, human. And that was the real legacy. Not fame, not headlines, but grace. Because in a world that often rewards noise, the Brooks family proved that stillness, steady, kind, and courageous could change everything. And as long as someone, somewhere, chose dignity first, the story would never truly end. The morning light touched Atlanta with a golden calm. The city was still waking up, cars whispering down the streets, sunlight sliding across the glass towers, and airplanes cutting slow arcs through the blue. Inside the Brooks home, everything felt peaceful. No phones ringing, no interviews waiting, no cameras outside the gate. Just the soft sound of breakfast being made and the smell of coffee drifting through the air. Amara stood by the window, watching a plane rise above the horizon. She smiled, remembering everything that had happened: the flight, the phone call, the storm, and all that came after. It felt like a different lifetime. Yet somehow, it was still here with her, quietly shaping every breath. Behind her, Lila walked in, her hair pulled up, holding 2 mugs of coffee. I knew you'd be up early, she said, handing one over. Amara smiled. Old habits. I like mornings when the world's quiet enough to listen. Lila sipped her coffee. You've got that look again, the one you get before a big decision. Amara laughed softly. Maybe because there is one. Lila raised an eyebrow. Oh, what now, running for office? Amara shook her head. No politics. I've had enough of cameras. But I've been thinking, maybe it's time we step back from pulse pay. Let new voices take over. Lila stared at her, surprised. You mean retire? Not retire, Amara said, her tone thoughtful. Redirect. We built a company, but the movement this message, it's bigger than us now. Maybe it's time to teach, to mentor, to pass it on. Lila took a deep breath, letting the idea settle. You're right, she said finally. Maybe we've been leading from the front long enough. Time to lead from behind. Raymond entered just then, jacket in hand, still sharp as ever, though his hair had turned silver at the edges. You two plotting world peace again? Amara turned and smiled. Just considering a change of altitude. He chuckled. I should have guessed. They sat down together for breakfast. It wasn't a fancy spread, just toast, fruit, and Evelyn's homemade jam. But it was perfect, the kind of morning where silence said more than words. Later that day, they headed to the airport for a ceremony unlike any other, the dedication of a new Skylux aircraft, the first of its kind. The name painted across the side read, The Brooks Legacy. Crowds filled the hangar. Journalists snapping photos, employees cheering as the family arrived. The aircraft gleamed beneath the lights, elegant, sleek, and proud. Claudia Shaw stood at the podium, her smile radiant. 1 year ago, I stood in this very company and questioned who we were. Today, I stand here to say we are better, because we chose courage, because we learned from the Brooks family that dignity doesn't just fly, it soars. Applause filled the room. Raymond took the stage next, his voice firm yet emotional. This plane represents more than an airline. It represents change, it represents grace, and it represents every person who ever decided to do what's right, even when no one was watching. Then he turned to his daughters. And to my girls, the calm and the fire, thank you for showing the world that quiet strength can move mountains. Lila wiped a tear before stepping forward. You know, she said with a half smile, it's funny. We never planned to make history. We just wanted to go to London. The crowd laughed softly. But maybe that's how change works, she continued. You're just living your truth. And suddenly, the world starts listening. Then it was Amara's turn. She approached the microphone, her voice steady and full of warmth. This isn't our legacy, she said. It's everyone's, because every person in this room and every person out there has the power to create their own version of dignity. The only question is, will you use it? The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was deep, the kind that feels like gratitude more than celebration. As the ribbon was cut and cameras flashed, Raymond placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. I think your mom would have loved this, he said quietly. Amara nodded, her eyes glistening. She's here, always, that evening. As the sun dipped below the runway, the family boarded the Brooks Legacy for its inaugural flight, a short journey across the country. Symbolic and simple. Inside the cabin, everything was silent except for the soft hum of the engines. Lila leaned back in her seat. Feels strange sitting here again? Amara smiled. Full circle. Raymond looked out the window. The first time I saw a plane, I was 8. I thought it was magic, a machine that could lift people into the clouds. Turns out, the real magic isn't in the flying, it's in how we land. They all fell quiet for a moment, watching the world shrink below them, the city lights glowing like constellations on Earth. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. It's my honor to welcome you aboard the Brooks Legacy, a flight dedicated to those who taught us that respect has altitude. Lila chuckled. Dad, I think you've started a poetry trend. Raymond smiled. As long as it rhymes with progress, I'm fine with it. When the plane landed, the passengers applauded, not for the smooth landing, but for what it represented, an ending that felt like a beginning. Outside, as they stepped down onto the tarmac, Amara looked up at the sky one last time. The stars were just coming out, soft and infinite. Lila turned to her. So, what now? Amara took a slow breath. Now we live the message, quietly, fully, every day. Raymond put an arm around both his daughters, and let the world take it from here. Months later, long after the noise faded, the story continued to echo in small, quiet ways. A teacher shared it with her students. A father told it to his kids at bedtime. A stranger held a door open, remembering Amara's calm. And somewhere, high above the clouds, a Skylux plane painted with the words, "The Brooks Legacy," carried hundreds of passengers across the sky, each one part of a story that had started with a single act of courage. Years from now, people might forget the details, the airport, the argument, the headlines, but they would remember how it made them feel, seen, respected, human. Because that was the legacy the Brooks family left behind, not fame, not power, but a reminder that grace is not quiet weakness. It is quiet strength. And sometimes, the calmest voice in the room can change the course of an entire world. As the night deepened over Atlanta, the city lights shimmered like stars on Earth, and a single plane disappeared into the distance, carrying with it not just passengers, but a promise that dignity would always, always fly first. The story of the Brooks twins isn't about scandal, it's about soul. It teaches us that grace is not weakness, it's the courage to stay calm when the world shakes you. Through every insult, every misunderstanding, they showed that strength doesn't always need volume. Sometimes, strength sounds like silence, followed by wisdom, in a time when outrage feels easier than empathy. They chose the harder path, compassion, and that's the lesson life keeps whispering to us all. No matter your color, your status, or your seat, dignity is not given. It's lived. This story reminds older generations of the truth they've always known, that change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing tall. It reminds the younger ones that success means nothing if it costs your humanity. And maybe, when you face your own moment of quiet injustice in your office, your home, or your heart, you'll remember Amara and Lila Brooks. You'll remember that sometimes the softest voice in the room can echo the loudest across the world. Thank you for being here, for feeling, for listening. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because every click, every share, keeps stories like this alive, stories that heal, that connect, that remind us who we are. Stay kind, stay human, and remember, dignity always flies first.